The morning sun cast long shadows across the red desert as David Mitchell climbed down from the transport ship's cargo bay. His boots hit the sandy ground with a soft thud, and he immediately felt the heat beginning to build, even though it was barely dawn on this alien world. Behind him, 5 other researchers were already busy unloading their equipment and supplies. "Temperature's going to hit 45 degrees by noon," called out Maria Santos, their weather specialist, checking her handheld scanner. "But the real concern is those wind patterns I'm seeing on the atmospheric readings." David nodded and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. They had landed on Kepler 442b 3 hours ago, and already the harsh environment was making itself known. The planet looked like a giant sandbox stretching in every direction, with strange rock formations jutting up from the endless dunes like ancient monuments. "Let's get the base camp set up before it gets too hot to work," David said, pulling on his work gloves. "We have 6 weeks to complete our mineral surveys before the next transport window opens." The team had been preparing for this mission for 2 years. Earth needed new sources of rare metals, and this planet's geological reports showed promising deposits. What the reports hadn't mentioned was that they wouldn't be alone on this world. The first sign of trouble came as a glint of silver in the orange sky. David squinted and pointed upward. "Is that one of ours?" Their pilot, Sam Rodriguez, checked his flight tracker. "Negative. No Earth ship scheduled in this sector for another month." The silver object grew larger as it approached, revealing itself to be unlike any human spacecraft. It was smooth and crystalline, almost like a giant jewel with perfect geometric faces that caught the sunlight and threw it back in rainbow patterns. The ship landed about 100 meters away with no sound at all, settling onto the sand as gently as a feather. 2 more identical ships appeared and landed nearby, forming a small triangle around the human camp. David felt his stomach tighten. First contact protocols had been drilled into every off-world team, but actually facing unknown aliens was different from training simulations. The beings that emerged from the lead ship were tall and graceful, standing almost 3 meters high on long limbs that moved with fluid precision. Their skin seemed to change colors like oil on water, shifting from deep blue to purple to gold in the morning light. They had 4 arms instead of 2, and their faces were elongated with large eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The leader approached their camp with smooth, confident steps. When it spoke, a small device on its belt translated its words into clear English. "I am Commander Zelthar of the Dominion Research Fleet," the being announced in a voice that sounded like it was used to giving orders. "We were not aware that lesser species had developed space travel to reach this sector." David stepped forward and tried to keep his voice steady. "I'm Dr. David Mitchell from the Earth Colonial Research Division. We're here on a peaceful scientific mission to study the planet's geology." The alien's large eyes looked David up and down as if examining an interesting insect. "Scientific mission? How amusing. We have been studying this world for 300 years. What could your primitive species possibly learn that we do not already know?" The insult was clear, but David forced himself to remain diplomatic. "Perhaps we could share information. Different perspectives often lead to new discoveries." This caused what David could only describe as laughter from the group of aliens. It sounded like breaking glass mixed with wind chimes. "Share information?" Zelthar repeated. "Tell me, human, creature, what is that pathetic structure your people are building?" The alien pointed with one of its 4 arms toward the human base camp. David's team was assembling a series of connected domes made from advanced polymer materials, designed to protect them from the planet's extreme weather conditions. "It's our research station," David explained. "The walls can withstand winds up to 400 kilometers per hour, and the life support systems." 400 kilometers per hour? Interrupted another alien, this one with darker skin patterns. "Our instruments detect that this planet's storm systems regularly produce winds exceeding 800 kilometers per hour. Your shelter is barely adequate for a light breeze." Maria Santos joined the conversation, her scientific curiosity overcoming her nervousness. 800 kilometers per hour? Our orbital surveys never recorded wind speeds that high." Zelthar's skin rippled with colors that seemed to indicate amusement. "Your surveys observe from space, primitive one. You see only the upper atmosphere. The true storms of this world move along the surface, invisible to your crude instruments. If you know about these storms, David said carefully, could you help us improve our shelter design? The aliens exchanged looks that were clearly mocking. Why should we waste time teaching children to play with building blocks? Zelthar replied. Your species lacks the intelligence to understand proper construction techniques. Look at our vessels. They are grown from living crystal that bonds with planetary energy fields, capable of surviving forces that would destroy your metal boxes completely. Pete Williams, their engineering specialist, couldn't stay quiet any longer. Our materials have been tested on dozens of different worlds. These shelters have survived conditions that would crush most structures. Have you tested them against a Category 9 atmospheric event? Asked a third alien. Of course not. Such storms do not exist in your limited experience of the universe. David could see his team getting angry at the aliens' constant insults, but he also noticed something else. Despite their arrogant tone, the aliens seemed genuinely concerned about the humans' safety. When do you expect the next major storm? Zelthar consulted a device that seemed to be part of his own body, growing from his palm like a living computer. The pressure readings indicate a massive system will form within the next day or two. Your fragile constructions will not survive such an event. Then help us build something better, David said simply. You obviously have the technology. Why let us die when you could prevent it? The alien commander's colors shifted to deeper, more serious tones. Help? Your species must learn through experience, as all young races do. Perhaps surviving your first real storm will teach you to respect forces beyond your understanding. As the aliens began walking back toward their ships, their dismissive laughter carried on the wind. Zelthar called back over his shoulder. We will observe your efforts with interest, humans. Try not to disappoint us with an early death. David gathered his team as the alien ships sealed themselves and became silent. The message was clear. They were alone on a hostile world with a potentially deadly storm approaching, and the only beings who could help them viewed the whole situation as entertainment. But humans had survived ice ages and asteroid impacts. They had crossed oceans in wooden boats and built cities in deserts. They would not be defeated by wind and sand, no matter how fast it moved. The real test was just beginning. The next morning brought an eerie calm that made everyone nervous. Maria Santos stood outside the main shelter dome, watching her instruments with growing concern. The atmospheric pressure had dropped significantly overnight, and the wind patterns were showing signs that worried her deeply. The readings don't make sense, she said to David as he joined her near the weather station. It's like the entire atmosphere is being pulled towards something, but I can't figure out what. David looked at the horizon where strange clouds were beginning to form. They didn't look like normal weather patterns. Instead of the usual white or gray, these clouds had an amber color that seemed to glow from within. The twin suns of Kepler 442b appeared dimmer than usual, even though they were climbing toward midday. How long do we have? David asked. If the aliens are right about wind speeds reaching 800 kilometers per hour, we might have less. Then 18 hours before the main storm hits, Maria replied, checking her calculations again. But there's something else. The seismic sensors are picking up vibrations from deep underground. It's almost like something down there is responding to the atmospheric changes. Pete Williams emerged from the main shelter, his face streaked with grease and his hands covered in dirt. I've done everything I can to reinforce our structures, he announced. Extra support cables, emergency power systems, and I've sealed every possible entry point. But honestly, if winds really hit 800 kilometers per hour, we're going to be in serious trouble. What about the underground bunker? Asked Rita Chang, their geologist, as she approached the group. That's our best option, Pete admitted. It's designed for extreme emergencies like asteroid impacts. If we can get everyone inside and seal it properly, we might be able to ride out the storm. The question is how long we'll be trapped down there. Our supplies are calculated for surface operations, pointed out James Murphy, their biologist. If we're stuck underground for weeks, we could run out of food and water. Their discussion was interrupted by a familiar figure approaching across the sand. Commander Zelthar was walking toward them alone, his forearms moving in what seemed like a more serious gesture than the mocking displays from the day before. "Human Mitchell," Zelthar called out as he got closer. "Your instruments are undoubtedly showing dangerous readings." David nodded. "Our equipment confirms a major storm system is developing. We're preparing emergency procedures." The alien's skin shifted through several color patterns before settling on dark purple. "Your emergency procedures will prove inadequate. This storm will be unlike anything your species has experienced in its short history. The ground itself will become liquid. The air will turn into a weapon that cuts through solid rock." "Then, why won't you help us?" David asked, his frustration finally showing. "You clearly have technology that could save our lives. We don't have to die just to prove some point about evolution." Zelthar's large eyes focused on David with what might have been regret. "It is not our way to interfere with natural selection. Your species chose to venture into dangers without proper preparation. The consequences of that choice belong to you alone." Rita Chang stepped forward, her geological training making her curious despite the danger. "But you're here too, facing the same storm. What makes your presence here different from ours?" The alien's head tilted in a way that reminded David of a bird studying something interesting. "We have earned our place through millions of years of advancement. We have moved beyond the limitations that still trap your primitive minds. World storms are merely inconveniences to us. We can depart at any moment our sensors detect true danger approaching." "True danger?" Maria looked up from her weather instruments. "What do you mean by true danger?" For the first time since meeting, Zelthar seemed uncertain about something. The colors in his skin flickered through rapid changes before settling on a mixture of purple and deep red. "The storm you fear is significant but manageable for properly prepared beings. However, this world harbors phenomena that even we treat with great caution. Ancient forces that existed before our civilization began." David felt a chill run down his spine despite the rising heat. What kind of ancient forces? But Zelthar was already backing away from their group. "Focus your efforts on surviving the next few days, human creatures. If your species proves capable of that basic achievement, perhaps we will consider speaking with you as equals." As the alien commander departed, David noticed something troubling about the 3 alien ships. They were no longer arranged in the casual formation from yesterday. Instead, they had moved into what looked suspiciously like a defensive perimeter, with their weapon systems clearly visible and glowing with ready energy. "Dr. Mitchell," Pete called urgently from near the seismic monitoring station. "You need to see this right away." David hurried over to where Pete was pointing at the underground sensor readings. The display showed rhythmic vibrations coming from deep beneath the planet's surface. The patterns were too regular to be natural geological activity, and they were getting stronger as the storm above them continued to build. "It looks almost like a heartbeat," Pete said quietly. "Like something massive is waking up down there." Maria joined them at the monitoring station, her face pale as she compared the seismic data with her atmospheric readings. "The magnetic field is fluctuating too," she reported. "Whatever's causing those underground vibrations, it's big enough to affect the planet's electromagnetic field." David looked back at the alien ships, now clearly positioned for defense rather than research, then at his own team's fragile shelters. For the first time since landing on this world, he wondered if they had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple weather system. The aliens' arrogance was beginning to look less like casual superiority and more like the bravado of beings trying to convince themselves they weren't afraid. Something was coming that scared even a species with millions of years of advancement. As if responding to his thoughts, the ground beneath their feet gave a subtle tremor that lasted just long enough to be noticed. In the distance, the amber clouds were growing larger and beginning to rotate in patterns that defied normal meteorology. Whatever was sleeping beneath Kepler 442b was starting to wake up, and the storm might be the least of their problems. The storm arrived like the end of the world. Rita Chang was in the underground bunker checking their emergency supplies when the first winds hit. One moment the surface was eerily quiet, and the next moment the entire shelter system was shaking like a toy in the hands of an angry child. The sound was beyond anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just loud, it was overwhelming, as if the planet itself was screaming. "Surface structures are failing," Pete shouted over the noise, his hands flying across the control panels that monitored their equipment above ground. The main research dome just lost structural integrity. The 6-person team was crammed into a space originally designed for equipment storage. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows, and the air recycling system was working overtime to handle their stressed breathing and the dust that seemed to be seeping through even their sealed walls. "The seismic readings are going crazy," James called out, pressed against his monitoring equipment. "Whatever's down there in the deep layers, the storm is definitely triggering a response." Through the bunker's single reinforced viewing port, they could see glimpses of the chaos above. Sand was moving in solid walls that looked more like ocean waves than anything atmospheric. The ground itself was rippling and flowing as if the planet's crust had turned liquid. And through it all, they could see the alien ships. The crystalline vessels were riding the storm like boats on a turbulent sea, their hulls glowing brighter and brighter as they somehow channeled the massive energies swirling around them. But even their advanced technology was being pushed to its limits. Rita could see one ship struggling to stay airborne, its elegant form being battered by winds that would have torn apart any human aircraft. "Look at that," Maria pointed through the thick viewing port. "They're not just surviving this storm, they're using it somehow." She was right. The alien vessels were drawing power from the atmospheric disturbance, their crystalline structures pulsing in rhythm with the lightning that now filled the sky in continuous displays. But there was tension in their formation, as if they were preparing for something even worse than the storm. That's when the ground opened up. The crack appeared without any warning. One moment the surface was solid, and the next there was a jagged, wound in the earth stretching from one horizon to the other. From its depths came a sound that somehow cut through even the storm's roar. It was deep and resonant, a thrumming noise that seemed to vibrate in their bones and make their teeth ache. "That's not geological," Pete whispered, his engineering training struggling to make sense of what they were witnessing. The crack widened, and something began to emerge from it. At first it looked like liquid shadow given physical form, a writhing mass of absolute darkness that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. But as more of it poured from the underground fissure, patterns became visible within the blackness. Geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly, structures that folded in on themselves in ways that violated everything they understood about three-dimensional space. "It's incredible," James breathed, his biologist mind trying to process the impossible, and absolutely terrifying. The entity continued to flow from the ground, growing larger with each passing moment. The storm seemed to respond to its presence, with the winds shifting into spiral patterns that centered on the emerging creature. Above them, the alien vessels moved into an even tighter defensive formation. Weapons systems that had remained hidden during their mocking interactions with the humans began to charge with visible energy that crackled between the ships. They knew this was here, David realized, his voice barely audible over the chaos. They knew something like this existed on this planet. Commander Zelthar's words echoed in his memory. Ancient forces that existed before civilization began. The entity reached what seemed to be its full emergence, towering kilometers into the storm-torn sky. It was impossible to judge its true size because perspective seemed to break down in its presence. Parts of it existed in normal space, while other sections seemed to phase in and out of reality itself, and then it became aware of its surroundings. The moment. The thing noticed the alien ships. What followed was not a battle in any sense they understood, but a collision between incompatible realities. The aliens' energy weapons fired in brilliant cascades of light that illuminated the entire landscape, but the beams seemed to pass through their target without any effect. In response, the entity simply moved, and one of the crystalline ships folded in on itself like paper being crumpled by invisible hands. "We need to do something," Maria said, her meteorologist training making her focus on practical measurements even in the face of impossibility. "That thing is generating its own weather patterns. The storm is getting worse, not better." She was right. The winds were now exceeding anything their instruments could measure, and their underground bunker was beginning to show stress fractures in its walls. Worse, the seismic activity was intensifying to the point where the ground itself was becoming unstable. "Do what?" Pete demanded, his voice cracking with strain. "We're insects compared to that thing. Our weapons wouldn't even be noticed by something that size." But David was thinking, his mind racing through possibilities that seemed insane but might be their only chance. Humanity's greatest strength had never been superior technology or physical power. It was adaptability, creativity, the ability to find solutions where none seemed to exist. As another alien ship was consumed by forces that made no sense according to known physics, David began to formulate a plan that was either brilliant or completely crazy. "The entity emerged when the storm reached maximum intensity," he said, speaking quickly as another tremor shook their bunker. "The atmospheric disturbance triggered some kind of awakening process. But storms have to end eventually. They run out of energy and dissipate." "What are you suggesting?" Rita asked. "What if we don't try to fight that thing directly? What if we attack the storm that's feeding it?" While the cosmic horror raged above them, and reality bent in ways that made their eyes water, David gathered his team around their damaged control systems. The entity's presence was affecting their equipment in strange ways. Screens flickered, with readings that made no sense, and the air itself seemed to hum with energy that made their skin tingle unpleasantly. "Listen carefully," David said, raising his voice over the chaos outside. "The aliens are trying to fight something that exists partially outside our normal universe. Their weapons can't hurt it, because they're thinking like soldiers instead of scientists." Pete looked skeptical as he tried to keep their power systems running. "What do you mean?" "The entity came out of the ground when the storm reached peak intensity. The atmospheric disturbance triggered some kind of awakening mechanism that's been dormant for who knows how long. But storms don't last forever. They burn out when they run out of energy to sustain themselves." Maria's eyes widened as she understood. "You want to kill the storm itself?" "More than that," David continued, pulling up their geological survey data on a tablet that was sparking from electrical interference. "Look at the seismic readings from before the entity emerged. It's not just responding to the storm, it's feeding off the atmospheric energy. The electrical activity and pressure differentials are what's keeping it anchored to our dimension." James nodded excitedly despite their desperate situation. "If we could disrupt that energy flow, break the connection between the storm and the entity, it might lose whatever process allows it to exist in our reality," Rita finished. "But how do we stop a planetary storm system with equipment designed for geological research?" David smiled grimly and pointed through the viewing port at the ongoing battle above them. Another alien ship was caught in what looked like a time distortion field, its hull aging decades in seconds before somehow reverting to its original state. "We don't stop it ourselves. We convince them to help us, but on our terms instead of theirs." Pete shook his head. "They've made it clear they think we're too primitive to be worth helping, and even if they wanted to cooperate, we don't understand their technology well enough to coordinate anything." "We don't need to understand their technology," David replied. "We just need to communicate with it." "Pete, you said their ships resonate with planetary magnetic fields, right? What if we use our ground-penetrating radar array to send modulated signals directly into the planet's magnetic field?" Pete's engineering mind was already working through the possibilities. The radar system could generate specific electromagnetic pulse patterns. If their ships are designed to read magnetic field variations as environmental data, they would receive our signals as sensor information, Maria finished. But would they understand what we're trying to tell them? Outside their bunker, a third alien vessel was being twisted by forces that seemed to stretch it across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Commander Zelthar's ship was still intact, but clearly struggling to maintain position as space-time warped around the entity's massive presence. "They'll understand," David said with more confidence than he felt. "Because right now, we're the only ones offering them a way to win that doesn't involve trying to punch holes in the laws of physics." The next 40 minutes were a desperate race against collapsing reality itself. While the storm continued to feed the entity and their bunker shook from impacts of debris moving at impossible speeds, the human team worked with frantic precision. Pete, and Maria collaborated on atmospheric modeling equations that described the storm's energy flows in mathematical terms. Rita and James monitored the entity's behavioral patterns through their damaged sensors, looking for weaknesses in whatever process kept it stable in their dimension. David coordinated everything while attempting to establish communication with the aliens. The breakthrough came when Maria realized the entity's emergence had created a standing wave pattern in the planet's magnetic field. "It's like a musical note being held continuously," she explained, her hands flying over her instruments. "If we can generate the right harmonic interference, we can break the resonance that's sustaining the entity's presence," Pete finished. "'Cause the storm, to collapse into itself instead of feeding energy to whatever keeps that thing anchored here." Their first transmission to the alien ships met with silence. The second attempt seemed to cause one of the weapon systems on Zelthar's vessel to flicker momentarily. On the third try, the alien commander's voice crackled through their communications. "System. Human Mitchell." Zelthar's translation came through heavy with static and what sounded like surprise. "Your electromagnetic signals contain atmospheric data that should be impossible for your species to generate. How is this possible? With your primitive equipment?" "No time to explain the technical details," David replied quickly. "We need to coordinate our systems with yours immediately. The entity is using the storm as a power source. If we can create specific interference patterns at these coordinates," he transmitted their mathematical calculations. "Our models show this will cause the storm to dissipate its energy into space instead of feeding the creature." There was a long pause, filled only by the sounds of reality being twisted into impossible shapes outside their shelter. When Zelthar finally responded, his tone had changed completely from the mocking superiority of their first meeting. "Your mathematical models are unexpectedly sophisticated, primitive in presentation but elegant in concept. We had not considered approaching this problem from an energy redistribution perspective rather than direct confrontation." "Will it work?" David asked. "According to your calculations, it should work perfectly," Zelthar admitted, and David could hear the reluctance in the alien's voice. "But the coordination required between our vessels and your equipment, the precision needed for success, one miscalculation could make the situation catastrophically worse." David looked around at his 5 teammates, 6 humans huddled in a damaged bunker beneath an alien sky, proposing to save themselves and a technologically superior species through nothing more than creative thinking and desperate determination. "Commander, Zelthar," he said, "we better not make any mistakes then. The coordination between human and alien technology required precision that neither species had ever attempted before. The crystalline alien vessels, designed to operate independently, now had to function as components in a larger system that included human equipment pushed far beyond its original design limits. Magnetic field modulation at 25% and climbing," Pete reported, sweat dripping from his forehead as he manually adjusted systems that were throwing sparks from overuse. "The radar array is holding together, but I'm seeing power fluctuations that could cause a complete failure." Through their bunker's cracked viewing port, they could see the alien ships moving into a precise triangular formation. Commander Zelthar's vessel had taken the lead position, its crystalline hull now glowing so intensely it hurt to look at directly. The 2 remaining ships flanked it perfectly, their energy systems synchronizing in a display of technological coordination that was beautiful and terrifying to witness. "Entity behavioral patterns are changing," James called out, monitoring the creature through their damaged sensors. "It's definitely reacting to our coordinated efforts. The dimensional fluctuations in its structure are becoming more erratic." The entity had continued growing since its emergence, now stretching up through the atmosphere like a living mountain that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. Parts of it flickered in and out of visibility as it phased between dimensions, but David could see the instabilities that James was measuring. Their plan was having an effect. "Atmospheric pressure is stabilizing in Sector 7, Maria announced with barely controlled excitement. "Storm rotation velocity is decreasing by 3%, 5%. It's actually working." But the entity wasn't going to surrender without a fight. As the storm began to weaken, the creature's response grew increasingly desperate. Tendrils of pure shadow lashed out across the landscape, each one leaving scars in space-time itself. One tendril struck close to their bunker, and for a terrifying moment David found himself looking at their shelter from impossible angles, seeing the same space from multiple perspectives that made his brain hurt. "Hull breach in Section 4, Pete shouted as alarms screamed around them. "Whatever that thing just did, it partially shifted our bunker through several dimensional states simultaneously." The breach wasn't normal. Instead of atmosphere rushing out, they found themselves staring through a hole that seemed to exist in multiple realities at once. Through it, they could see not just the storm outside, but other versions of the same landscape under different colored skies, with different numbers of suns, some where the ground was made of crystal instead of sand. "Don't look directly at it for too long," Rita warned, averting her eyes from the impossible view. "I think it's showing us alternate dimensional versions of this location. Extended exposure could cause permanent psychological damage." Above them, one of the alien vessels was caught in a similar dimensional distortion. Half the ship existed in their reality while the other half was somewhere else entirely. But instead of being destroyed, the aliens were adapting in real time. David could see them rerouting power and reconfiguring their crystalline hull matrices to function across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. "Remarkable." Zelthar's voice came through their communication system, filled with what sounded like genuine admiration. "We had theorized about transdimensional adaptation protocols, but never attempted to implement them operationally. Your species' unconventional approach has forced us to innovate beyond our established parameters." "Is that another compliment?" David asked while monitoring their atmospheric calculations. "It is a statement of fact," Zelthar replied. "Your mathematical models continue to prove accurate. Storm energy dissipation has reached 22% and is accelerating. The entity's dimensional anchoring process is becoming critically unstable." They could see the truth of this assessment. The massive creature was flickering more frequently now, its impossible form wavering like a mirage in desert heat. The shadow tendrils were becoming less coordinated and more desperate. Whatever mechanism allowed it to exist in their reality was breaking down, as the storm that sustained it lost power. "Energy cascade is beginning," Maria announced. "The storm's collapse is accelerating exponentially. At this rate, complete dissipation in 31 minutes. But 31 minutes was an eternity when fighting something that existed outside normal physics. The entity made one final, desperate attempt to maintain its presence in their dimension. It began pulling energy directly from the planet's core through quantum tunnels that briefly made the entire surface dangerously radioactive. "Radiation. Levels are spiking beyond safe limits," James called out urgently. "We need to evacuate this bunker immediately." "Evacuate to where?" Pete demanded. "Outside is still a planetary storm with radiation levels that will kill us in minutes." That's when Commander Zelthar's voice returned through their communications, but this time with a tone David had never heard from the alien before. It was respect, mixed with something that might have been gratitude. "Human research team, this is Commander Zelthar. We are extending our protective energy fields to encompass your position. You have demonstrated capabilities that earn you the right to survival." Through the dimensional breach in their bunker wall, they could see Zelthar's ship repositioning itself directly above their shelter. A shimmering barrier of crystalline energy descended around them, creating a protective cocoon that filtered out both the deadly radiation and the worst effects of the collapsing storm. "Thank you," David said simply. "Thank us by surviving to see tomorrow," Zelthar replied. "Your species has demonstrated problem-solving capabilities we did not anticipate. The galaxy may have great need for such creative thinking in the future." The final phase of the storm's collapse was spectacular beyond description. As the atmospheric energy dissipated harmlessly into space, the entity's massive form became increasingly unstable. Reality seemed to snap back into proper focus as the creature lost its dimensional anchoring, its impossible geometry simplifying into patterns that were merely difficult to look at instead of sanity-threatening. With a sound like the universe itself taking a deep breath of relief, the entity collapsed inward and vanished completely, leaving only a perfectly circular crater where it had emerged from the planet's depths. The storm winds fell to gentle breezes, and for the first time since landing, They could see stars shining clearly in an alien sky. In the aftermath, as the protective energy field around their bunker faded and their instruments registered safe atmospheric conditions, David's team emerged to find Commander Zelthar waiting for them on the surface. The aliens' skin patterns had shifted to colors they had never seen before. What Rita would later theorize indicated profound respect mixed with genuine curiosity, and perhaps even admiration. "Your species," Zelthar began without preamble, "approaches problems from perspectives we would never consider. You lack our technological sophistication, but you possess something we may have lost during our advancement. The ability to think beyond established paradigms and create solutions where none should exist." David brushed sand from his hair and managed a tired smile. "Is that your way of saying we surprised you?" "It is our way of saying you have earned an invitation," Zelthar replied. "The Dominion has protocols for species that demonstrate exceptional capabilities. Would you be interested in sharing your unconventional perspectives with a wider galactic community?" Looking around at his exhausted but triumphant team, at the alien vessels that had protected them when they could have simply left, and at the crater where an impossible entity had briefly violated the laws of reality itself, David realized that humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning. "Commander Zelthar," he said, extending his hand in the same gesture he had offered during their first hostile meeting. "I think we would be very interested in that conversation." This time, the alien reached out and grasped the offered hand with one of his 4 appendages, his skin shifting to warm golden colors. "Welcome to the wider universe, humans. Try not to break anything too important." David laughed, the sound carrying across the now peaceful landscape under alien stars. "No promises, but we'll do our best."